Hi, and welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Welcome to the program. Across Europe, nearly 17,000 synagogues once stood at the heart of Jewish communal life, places of prayer, learning, and gathering that reflected centuries of creativity, faith, and belonging. Most of them were destroyed during the Third Reich and in the early takeover of the communist regimes. What remains today is a fragmented architectural and historical record, and in many cases, silence. My guest today has devoted years to restoring those lost spaces to memory through art and meticulous historical research. Andrea Strongwater is the author and artist behind the extraordinary new book, Lost Synagogues of Europe, which recreates in vivid color nearly 80 destroyed synagogues and documents the stories of the communities that built them, sustained them, and in so many cases, lost them. Strongwater is an internationally exhibited artist whose work appears in major institutional collections, including the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, the Herbert F. Johnson Museum at Cornell University, the University Medical Center of Princeton, and the Shoah Memorial in Paris. Her synagogue paintings have also been featured by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. In this latest work, she brings together decades of artistic practice with a deep commitment to Jewish history and preservation. But before we get into our conversation, just a quick reminder, if you enjoy this program, subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch all of our episodes, and follow us on Facebook to stay up to date with our latest content. Andrea, thank you for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
Well, to begin with, this is always the first author question. Tell us about your own background, your studies, and your career. And do you work across a variety of media? Earlier in your career, were you already focused on architectural subjects, or did your artistic work center on something else?
Well, the architecture, for whatever reason, I was always interested in architecture. And I went to Cornell University College of Architecture, Art, City and Regional Planning. And those were three subjects that just always interested me. Even when I was in high school, I was writing papers about planning cities. I thought that I wouldn't have enough ideas to be an artist. So the plan was to become an architect, because that way you get ideas. But it turned out that after the first year in college, I realized I had more art ideas than I would ever live long enough to produce. So I decided to be an artist, but I still had that interest in architecture. So I licensed my artwork for the use in products. As example, I have I think 14 or 15 jigsaw puzzles. I work with an agency, and they work with manufacturers that need art, and I produce art. So the agent is the middleman. And when I first started doing that, I hadn't done any Jewish subjects at all since I was in elementary school. And the first agent I had said to me, "You need a niche. And could your niche be Judaica, Jewish stuff? Could you design a Jewish calendar? So, an American calendar with Jewish images." So I did that, and it did very well. It still hasn't been made into a calendar, but once you scan the paintings, they can be used in a lot of ways. So they're tiles, they're greeting cards, there are a lot of different things. So then after I did that, I did Hanukkah menorahs. And then I had no idea what else I could do that was Jewish, that was also marketable in a larger sense, not just in Judaica stores. So I was rummaging through books, the bookshelf, and I had given my mother a book. I lived in France for some time, and I bought a book of postcards of Jewish life from 1895 to 1916 or 1915, something like that. And you can imagine that the postcards, the photographs that were taken at that time are not the kinds of photographs we have now. They're very blurry, they're black and white, they're not very defined. And so I was going through the book, and I thought, well, I'll paint 4 synagogues because they were attractive to me. And everybody loved them, not just Jewish people, but everybody that I show them to like them. And when you work in licensing, you always have to do a collection of something. So I did 4 the first time, and then did another 4, and everybody liked them. And someone asked me, who's everybody? So the guy that I knew who worked at Fidelity Investments, who was Chinese, hung them in his office. So I thought, well, that includes everybody. Sort of goes beyond being Jewish. So I painted more, and then I don't remember whether I called the Holocaust Memorial or they called me, but they said in their shop, the shop people said that people were always asking what happened to the buildings. So what they wanted was postcards of my paintings that they could sell in the shop. So that's what I did for them. And then people started asking questions about the synagogues. And you may know this, there's not a lot of information out there. It's not easily retrieved about these communities and buildings. So I started to do some research, and as I said, it was very difficult. I had the Jewish Theological Seminary, I lived very close. So I had that library, and I had the library at Cornell, and there just was not a lot of information. So I decided I would just dig in and find as much information I could. I was showing the work all along, and then because there were so many questions, I realized that I could tell a story. I wanted to tell a story of Jewish life. I don't know whether I should say I object, but I find it very difficult. I can't watch anything about the Holocaust because all I do is cry. For me, it's completely overwhelming. My mother felt the same way. So this way I can tell the story about the buildings, and the buildings are the repositories of this life. So you can learn about the story without crying. Some people do cry. I cried at the beginning, but it's a much easier way to accept the story of what existed before it was taken away. So that was the goal.
So when you began, did you have a sense of how extensive the research and writing would be, given, as you've said, the complex histories of the places where these synagogues were built and used? I've seen some of the synagogues in your book, and I know, having traveled through Central and Eastern Europe, that sometimes these magnificent structures are kind of in a vast wasteland because, of course, the communities are gone, but the buildings have remained. How long did it ultimately take you to complete both the artwork and the manuscript, because so much research went into this?
I don't know, but I think the answer to that question is I always found it fascinating. So it never felt like a lot. So my rule of life is if it's not interesting and fun, don't do it. So it was just really, really interesting. And it kind of reminds me, I mean, some of us are old enough to remember when there used to be card files. You remember in a library, there used to be a card file, and they would be in pencil marks. There would always be these little suggested words of what people thought would get you to the next step. And that's kind of how I felt about it. There was always something popping up that took me to a next step. And I found, and the other thing I believe that the computer has extrasensory knowledge. So the thing is, once you start searching this, it brings up more than it did if you hadn't been searching that. So, for example, like if you're looking for a refrigerator and you search for refrigerators, you'll notice that the next month or something, you'll get all kinds of ads or information about refrigerators. So it's the same thing with synagogues or the name of a city. If you search that, more information comes to you. A next door neighbor tried to help me do the research and she couldn't find anything. And I would type in and I would find a whole lot of stuff. So I think it's just a process. And it was fascinating. And I found so much, so many interesting tidbits, like little stories. What I want the book to be is that it tells you stories. I'm not giving you the list of rabbis that preach there. I'm not giving you anything sort of dogmatic. I'm telling you the stories and what people said about it. I found lots of memoirs and stories. There was one synagogue, they used to tell the children that there was a golem because the children worried, how did the rabbi make the synagogue warm? And the whole story was, you see these memoirs of adults, Holocaust survivors, talking about the golem that lived in the synagogue. So I wanted it to be that kind of story rather than more academic.
Now, many of the synagogues that you depict were extraordinarily grand, beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful buildings, even those located in relatively small towns with richly detailed interiors and striking exterior designs. Can you talk about the architects behind these buildings, as well as the artisans and craftspeople who helped bring them to life?
Well, that was one of my goals. I was trying to find the architect of every single building. It's actually not possible, but I dug in as much as I could, and found the architects where I could. And then, of course, there's the story of the wooden synagogues, where very often I'll meet people who will say, "Oh, I know we were poor because we went to a wooden synagogue," which is just, that doesn't make sense, because the wooden synagogues were so elaborate, so carved, so decorated. The thing is, they were built in the 16 and 1700s. So if you look at a picture taken in the late 1800s of wood that's lived for 300 years, it looks saggy-baggy. But that's not what they were like. They were very, very, very elaborate and beautiful. And Poland tried to make them national historic landmarks before they were burned, before they were destroyed. So people really appreciated them big time.
Your visual style is especially distinctive. These are not architectural renderings in the traditional sense, but painterly works of art. Some might describe the style as intentionally folk art like, with an all over, almost hermetic light source that extends to the landscape and the sky, reinforcing a two-dimensional quality. I wish everybody who's watching, well, maybe they will all buy the book, so they can see exactly what I'm talking about. How do you see your technique as conveying the character of the periods and places in which these synagogues once stood?
I never think about technique. And I only discovered that I had a style after I wrote the book, and people looked at these and said things like what you did. But what I go with was, when I was in college, the story was, remember, I was in an art department, in an practicing art school. And the story was that painting was dead. Everyone was saying painting's dead, no one's going to paint, it has no meaning. And I was pretty devastated, because I also wanted to design, for Broadway, and Broadway was kind of dying. So whatever it was, I had a really fabulous teacher who I do mention in the book. And he said to me, "Yes, people say painting is dying, but when you paint, I'm there." So I always hang my hat on that and know that whatever I do, it just works. So I don't this was another thing we debated in college. What is art? So there are many things you can learn to make art, but the thing that elevates it from just a painting to something more is really undefined and magical. There's just no way to come up with an answer for that. So I don't know what makes people feel like they can go to my paintings, but I know that it works.
Well, I want to emphasize that this book is essential reading for anyone seeking to understand the history of Jewish life in Europe, a history that was marked by extraordinary creativity and resilience and upheaval. I just mentioned in my own case, many years ago, I visited my mother's shtetl, where she was born, in a very small village in Lithuania. I did a little research, and I was told that in 1940, and use that as kind of a benchmark, there were 50 Jewish families and 50 Lithuanian families. So when we went to visit, there were two buildings that old timers could tell you where they were. One was the Jewish bakery, and they knew it was the bakery because after the war, there was a big oven there. And the other was the synagogue. And it wasn't even one of these grandiose wooden designs. It was just kind of a wooden building. But these synagogues are really historical markers for how Jews lived. Now, the written narratives are just as powerful as the illustrations in your book. Did you work largely on your own to uncover and assemble these histories connected to these synagogues? And you talked a little about it. Was much of the material new to you? And how has the process changed your own understanding of the Jewish experience in Europe?
Um, it was mostly me. Apparently, I do a lot of run-on sentences. So I had a manuscript editor from JPS who is well known to be very strict about writing. So I had a good editor, and she chopped up my made my sentences um, more understandable because I tend to put a lot of ideas in one sentence. So that sort of straightened out. As for how it reflected, so this is kind of a funny story, but for me, Fiddler on the Roof is a very real thing. My grandfather was the first person in his city to get a sewing machine, and the whole group, that scene, Muddle the Tailor, when they all come with the baby, and so that was my grandfather's story. And the fact is that the person who wrote Fiddler on the Roof, his son sat next to me in high school because his name was Stein. It's Stein and Strongwater, was alphabetical. So this creativity always existed. I mean, the fact that it existed was always obvious to me. So I was very happy to have it all reflected in the research. So it was more that I believed it, so that this was proving what I believed. The research proved what I believed. And the stories, I mean, the stories that turned up were just, I totally understood Shalom Aleichem stories, There was just like reading, it was like reading a book.
Well, here's a practical but crucial question relating to research, and that is language. I imagine that very little of your source material was originally written in English. So, how did you navigate that challenge in your research?
I just kept searching. I found a lot of things translated. There are actually some Yizkor books that are translated into English. I also speak French, so I did that. And there's just enough. I mean, I did it, so I guess there's enough. Do you know what I mean? Um, and the thing is, there were some academic people who were, you know, a lot goes on in making a book, good things and bad things, So there were academics who said, well, she didn't write everything there is to know about that synagogue. There's so much more to know. But the point was, I wasn't looking for everything. I was looking for a crucial story, a story that would cement that synagogue in your mind, or cement that story in your mind. So there was enough of that out there that I could find it.
Well, tell us how the book is structured. Can you explain how the chapters are organized and how you decided on that particular framework?
Well, then we get into the editorial process. So when I started doing it, the project, because remember, it's also paintings, and I started it as paintings. And oh my God, it was so difficult because every city had, 6 different names. It had a Polish name, a German name, a Yiddish name, a Hebrew name, a local name. And I couldn't figure out where anything was, or how to find images about the city, because I had to search 4 different languages. Um, so I actually, because I'm very visual, I went to the map room at Cornell University and the guys pulled out all these historical maps. They have a whole lot of stuff there. And so we were matching, the cities, and how I could match the city names. You could do it visually. If you had the map of 100 years apart, you could tell which city it was with the 2 different names. And they told me that a good academic choice is to name the city in the language of the country that it was at that time. Pick a year and name it in that year. So I named everything in 1936 because I decided I wanted Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia went away in 1938 and had a map from 1936. So I named it 1936, and it made life really much, much easier. But then when I went to Jewish Publication Society, and I divided everything by country, because to me, one of my, I had a bunch of things I wanted to say. One of them was the destruction was not limited to Poland and Germany and Austria. The destruction was all over Europe. That's one of the things I wanted to say. So listing all the countries was important to me. So that's what I did with that list. And that's actually in the book. But Jewish Publication Society did not like that system, and they decided they wanted it done in chronology of when the buildings were built. So we reorganized it so the book is chronologically correct. So the synagogues are listed in the years that they were structured, but then there's another guide. So they put in my thing as a guide so you can match what happened in 1936 with the chronology. And the other thing was that we had, I had someone putting in his advice who's, I don't know, Vladimir Levin, who's at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And his idea was to make all the names of the cities as they are today. So that's what it is. I objected to that because I didn't want diacritical marks. I didn't want anyone to look at something and be turned off because they couldn't read it. So that's why I wanted the names to be, Americanized English. But I lost that battle. So it's okay.
But you have this by country. My guess is that at least some readers, I did. I went immediately to Lithuania because depending on your roots, so you want to start there, and then do the others. That's just a guess, but I assume some readers will do that as well. What are your favorites? Give me 2 or 3 favorites, and walk us through a little bit about what ultimately happened to these communities.
Well, it's always a hard question because I don't have favorites. I like them all. I think they're all interesting. One thing that I really like architecturally is Frankfurt. I think I gave Frankfurt as one of the things you can show because architecturally, when you see it, someone got attached to an arc, to a curve, and they repeated it architecturally, design-wise, interior, exterior, on the entrance from the street. There's just all these curves. And someone who's involved with a lot of architects. So the way they chose an architect for that, this is very common. They had a contest. So when people don't know exactly what they want, they have a contest. And they ask architects to submit designs, and then they pick one. So that's what happened in Frankfurt. And they picked one. They gave it the #1 prize, but the people that they gave the commission to was #3. So, then architects, if you ask an architect what happened, they'll say, oh, someone had the money for #3 who didn't want to give it to #1. So that's probably the case. And the Rothschild family was involved in that synagogue. So there was probably a lot of money to throw around in that one. The other interesting thing about it was, well, there's 2 things. You know that line, that's the synagogue I go to, and that's the synagogue I would never step foot in. So that's been going on forever and forever and forever. So in Warsaw, they put a lot of synagogues have quotes from the Bible carved into the building. And in Warsaw, instead of using, I forget the right word for it, but a symbol of the word God, they wrote God. And so there are people that wouldn't go to the synagogue because that was somehow a shanda, it was a terrible thing to do. So there were people that wouldn't go to that synagogue, but there were people that would go to that synagogue. I forgot what I was saying, which one. And the other thing I love are the wooden synagogues, just because I think there's a term, someone accused me of this, horror vacui, which is Latin for hatred of empty space. And the synagogues have no empty space. They're just completely covered with design and carving. And one of the synagogues had bells on the curtain covering the ark. So every time you opened the ark, it would tinkle. I just loved that. It was so dramatic, and it had storks on either side. So I love the wooden synagogues for their total decoration. And the interesting thing is, that was actually easy to do research with, because there's a book. There was a department in the University of Warsaw, because remember, the Polish government wanted to make these National Historic Landmarks. So there was a department that was going around measuring, scanning, taking pictures of all the wooden synagogues. And this was between World War I and World War II. So somehow this material lasted. It didn't get destroyed. It got moved around, and a lot of it still exists. And a book was published from that material in 1954, 1957. It's in Polish and in English. And the Poland Museum, which is the Museum of the Jewish People in Warsaw, has that original material. And the nice thing when I went there last year was that the original photographs are so much better than the photographs I worked with. But that particular thing you can dive into much more deeply than a lot of the other information that I had.
How many of the great structures in Europe do you think were destroyed on Kristallnacht that are not standing? I mean, do we have any idea?
Yeah, I forget the guy's name. There's someone who actually wrote a whole bunch of books calculating everything. So I vaguely remember like 217 or something like that. But there were other things that happened before Kristallnacht. Like one of the ones I did was Dortmund. And the other thing you have to remember is a lot of these synagogues were really the center of life. It wasn't like you went to the synagogue because you were religious. It was, there were coffee rooms, there were theaters, there was concert halls, life took place in these places, not just religious stuff. So Dortmund was a huge complex, and it was destroyed in September 1938. And what happened was the government had a meeting Sunday afternoon outside the building, just a rally of some sorts. And at the end of the Nazis, and at the end of the rally, they destroyed the synagogue and the records. So what the Nazis did was they all kept records. They all kept diaries. So you can very often read what the guy who exploded the synagogue felt about it. And the idea was they were experimenting to see what would happen if they destroyed a lot of synagogues. What would the people do? So they destroyed Dortmund. The question that I always ask when I give a lecture is, no one did anything. No one, obviously people left the country, but it's a terrible thing to say, but we're kind of in that moment right now. It's hard to know what to do. It's not an easy thing to say, okay, I'm going to go shoot the Nazis. So that was the question that always reminds me of Dortmund. And that was a huge building. Huge. I didn't paint the whole thing. Had more
Well,
stuff.
this is something I often ask authors and artists, but it feels especially fitting here. After spending so much time researching and painting and writing about these synagogues, what do you hope that readers ultimately will take away from the book?
Oh, I want everyone to understand the incredible richness of our society. It's so rich and developed and interactive and helpful in so many ways. I'm not saying the world is perfect, but the culture was just so amazing and creative. So I want people to remember that part.
You can find Lost Synagogues of Europe by Andrea Strongwater at bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, or wherever you get your favorite books. Andrea, thank you for joining us and for bringing such care and beauty and historical depth to the preservation of Europe's lost synagogues. Your work ensures that these spaces and the communities that built them won't be forgotten. So thank you very much.
And thank you for letting me speak about it.
Well, that's all for today's episode of Conversations with B'nai B'rith. Big thanks to Andrea Strongwater for joining us and for sharing her remarkable work bringing long silenced chapters of European Jewish life vividly back into view. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Share this episode, post about it on social media, and leave us a comment. To stay updated and to find all of our content, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. We'll be back soon with more thoughtful conversations on Jewish history, culture, and the issues that matter most to our community. Until then, I'm Dan Mariaschin. Thanks for listening. Take care.